We are live now.
Good morning and welcome everyone from the beautiful city of Melbourne. On your other screen, you will see my colleague, Marie Dutown, who has been with Polaron for about a month, but it feels like at least 10 years, Marie. Is that right?
Yeah, it does feel that way. Good morning, Eva. Yes, it's been a month today, it turns out. So yeah, I joined Polaron and I'm the business unit manager for the language services. It's been a great start. We've been very busy and we're very happy to be able to help the community through this COVID-19 situation. So yeah, it's been great.
Well, welcome, and tell us a bit more about what you actually do. So you have a team of several people and dozens and dozens of translators. A lot of your work is managing of projects, coordinating people. There's lots of moving parts. But can you maybe just tell us briefly what you do?
Yeah, sure. So yes, so we have an in-house team of project managers helping me with the requests we get from clients, from various organizations. And so then we reach out to translators and checkers, community checkers, and make sure we deliver the best translations for clients. We sometimes discuss even the content with the clients, and that's good language, the topic we're going to discuss today, because sometimes we need even to provide some feedback to the client about the source document, for example. And and so we deliver the project as quick as we can with the greatest quality we can, and keep everyone happy.
Marie, you come from a kind of a corporate background where a lot of the work was high volume, a lot of localization work, a lot of sort of high-end translation for software developers. How does that differ from what you do today?
Right. Yes. Thank you. That's a great point. So it differs because the variety of the work, right? So the volumes may be smaller, but there are many more of them in many more languages, and reaching out with a direct impact on the community. So this is where there is a big difference. However, the way you do linguistics and the way you handle translation projects remains the same.
Right. And just this morning, our wonderful Andrea, who's managing this session behind the scenes, hello Andrea, sent us an article, and I wanted to mention that article because it talks about quality of translation in the COVID phase. And what happened is that I guess community leaders have expressed concerns about the quality of the translation, and we were a little bit shocked. I think I was a bit winded when I read it, and I'm like, oh, good, that's not good. But then when we started looking at what the community has said or what the people's feedback was, it wasn't very precise, and that's a problem, isn't it? Because if you say to someone, well, that's a really bad translation, what do you actually mean? Is it the style? Are there mistakes? Is it, what is it? So I think if we were to tell people that are listening to us about how to handle feedback on translation, is the first thing is that we very much welcome it, even though it's sometimes pretty stressful, because people will say, well, it's a bad translation without really telling you any more. But what would you say, Marie, would be, apart from taking a deep breath, what would be the first step of managing feedback if it's not so positive, I guess, because positive feedback we always want.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the first thing to think about is that it's okay and it happens, and misunderstanding happens and mistake happens, right? And it's okay, it's part of it. Linguistics are not an exact science, so there are going to be flaws in there. But the flaws, they have very different, origins, right? Because it's not necessarily the translation that is wrong in the first place. The issue can come from the source document itself that needs some more work on it, or some discussions, because sometimes wouldn't translate in certain cultures. So and that's why having the project manager in between helps with this, because we can coordinate with the client explaining why that wouldn't work in certain languages, for example, right? So yeah, that can be the first issue, right? The source document itself. but also the content itself of the source document, because we can talk about specific contexts like COVID-19, where all the terminology had to be built. So of course, there will be some discussions, and it's okay not to get it right the first time around, because it's new to everyone, right? Or certain domains. I don't know, we talk about IT, but it could be diabetes. So this is why it's so important as well to clarify the terminology. We spoke recently about terminology management, and this is where it makes a big difference as well, because sometimes the terms you use aren't used in a way that is done for most of the people, right? So the clarifications are part of the process, and it is okay. Or the intent of the document, right? We know that we sometimes touch on sensible topics, whether, you know, they can be political or contextual. So that can impact the translation as well, because you would translate differently depending on who you are. And as we were talking about recently as well, it's all about one person. We are different persons with different brains, and sometimes we'll think differently and it will come out differently. It's important to accept that as well, and to think, yeah, okay, here, yeah, I can see why I could improve, or, oh, I love your suggestion, I didn't think about it. So it's okay, because it makes us grow and it makes us get better. However, in certain cases, it's also okay for the translator to say, I disagree. And I'm telling you that what I did is right, and explain why, give some context of why you chose that approach and not another one. So it's really all about communication. Most of the time, that's the core thing: communicating, accepting, bouncing back, explaining, and then usually everyone's happy.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Mary, because I think what happens is that people get a bit defensive. So I think language is something really personal, and people think they own it, and they are the only people that are right, the only person that is right about this particular sentence, this particular word. And in a country like Australia, where you know, we speak about 300 languages, that in itself is an issue, because you have local communities that have lived here for a long time. In the meantime, you know, in the last 30, 50 years, the language in the country back home has changed. So how do you reconcile those stylistic changes of vocab or terminology, or how do you make it relevant to the community that lives in Australia? So for community approved translations, as we call them, or pieces of work that are intended for the community, who's, you know, a lot of them are elderly or have low literacy levels, it's really important to get them done in Australia by Australian translators, because they'll have that understanding of the context and how to put things to the community that they can actually relate to. And of course, with us, we go through several levels of checking and approval. And from time to time, we have like a massive argument between everybody and about one word. So one example that I often quote when I talk about this issue is, I think Centre for Ethnicity and Health, CH, whatever the acronym stands for, they came to us a few years ago with a poster that they translated into Chinese about responsible gambling. And they received community feedback that was really negative. Like, they were very worried about, you know, the quality of the translation. And there was really less than 20 words, fewer than 20 words on that page, on the poster. So they came to us and said, can you please show it to your translator, because we're very worried. We printed, you know, thousands of copies of this thing. And so our translator looked at it and said, look, there's actually absolutely nothing wrong with this particular translation. So then we gave it to another, because we still couldn't work out what was going on. And in the end, what was going on was a political issue to do with the community organization that gave feedback being anti-gambling. So it wasn't the translation, it wasn't the translator, it was the message that was an issue. And then in the end, once we worked that out, and it was pretty stressful, let me tell you, because you have people saying, you know, terrible translation, and people saying, well, there's nothing wrong with it. So like, how do you reconcile, you know, such a polarized feedback? And we did work out that it was somebody's opinion, nothing to do with the word, but the concept. So how would you say, Marie, that what do we do to be able to manage feedback that's so polarizing, so emotional, I guess, even?
Yeah, well, yeah, so that's the thing, right? So we're talking in this case, mistake versus opinion, right? So
right.
yeah, so this is where we are in between the project managers, because we clarify this aspect, right? And then if feedback needs to be given to translators, my advice to translators is that don't take it personally, because it comes from lots and lots and lots of discussions. For different reasons, it went that way, but it could have gone another way, and it's not related to the work you did, but to a specific context or specific client. And it's actually very interesting to know for the translators, because even if overall your translation is okay, for a specific client, you will have to make some adjustments. And it's very important to think, oh, when I do work for such an organization or in such, in such industry, my focus needs to be here because the style is not quite the same, or this is more or less sensitive, or so it's, yeah, again, it's about making your work even more precise and accurate depending on the context. But it's never, it shouldn't be personal. But yeah, it can be hard because sometimes you put so much effort and love into what you do that, yeah, it can hurt. But let's see, the silver lining in this is just improving and getting better every time.
Right. Absolutely. And that's the main point of this whole conversation, that if you communicate well and are able to talk about words rather than emotions, that's the most important thing, because I think people do get caught up in, I spend hours writing this, and, is this not good enough? What's happening? Who are you to give me this feedback? And really, at the end of the day, the whole purpose of all of this is to make the translation better. So if your feedback is not to improve it, but it's just your opinion, that doesn't go to the improvement of the translation, does it?
That's right, absolutely. And when we say making translation better, we're not only talking about grammar. Grammar, of course, is the basic, right? We want to get that right. But making translation better goes beyond that. We often talk about, oh, it's stylistic, it's only stylistic, which is true, but it's also important. It's also important because that's what makes the difference for the client. And that's why we, the translation industry, make a difference compared to machine translation, because we're able to insert that, the cultural aspect of it or the style aspect of it. So it's important not just to put the dust under the carpet and not take into consideration the stylistic feedback, because for some clients it is important.
And I think it's also a matter of respect to the source text. So the source text is what the clients come to us with, and it's usually in English, and they have spent, there's potentially even a committee that wrote this text. So you cannot expect a translator to do justice to what's been written unless you have a feedback loop and a second person checking it. So and sometimes it's really hard to explain it to people, because they think, well, why can't you just press a button and it'll just spit out Chinese or French or Greek or whatever it is? And it just doesn't work like that, because, I say we only ever as good as the last translation. So, and I think the other important thing for translators to know is to reflect on that and think, okay, what is my translation going to be used for? Because, I think because we are so busy, and I think sometimes we work under pressure, we forget that whatever we translate is going to be used by the community, and they will actually read it and use this to inform themselves or make decisions about their health or legal affairs. So it's really important to firstly get it accurate, but secondly, make it sound as good as the original if possible.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes even better than the original. You find yourself sometimes translating it, and it's great content. And but we know that even between two native speakers of a language, we're going to disagree. And it's not personal. Again, it's just the way we're built, right? And that's why, you have sometimes to compromise or just to just to accept things, and that's okay. And everyone will always benefit from it.
I'll give another example. You know, we are in sort of severe lockdown in Melbourne at the moment, but when we're not, I get to travel a lot around Australia and meet with clients. And when I discuss these issues, I often give an example of a translation we did into 24 languages a while ago now about palliative care. So in the mainstream, we get a lot of education about, you know, things like mental health or aging, or in this instance, palliative care. But it takes a number of years for various communities to get that message. So in any case, Palliative Care Australia decided to do, I think there were 3 brochures. It took us 3 months to produce all this. So they were all co-designed with the community. We had, per language, we had, I think, 4 people working on it, and the client was very hands-on involved. Anyway, we finalized everything, and then it went for final approval to community organizations, as we usually do, community leaders. And the Greek translation went to Pronia, which is it used to be called Greek Welfare back then, just so that they could read it and give us feedback about how useful it is for the community. So the feedback was, and I quote, "Great translation, but you've mistranslated palliative care." So of course we were like stressing out like a big time. Because if you imagine the amount of work that went into it. So we went to Nikos, our Greek translator, and we said, "Nikos, you know, this is the feedback." And he's like, "Do you realize that palliative is actually a Greek word? Like, how do you want me to translate that?" So we're like, "Well, you know, let's workshop it." And he sent us, you know, dictionary meanings and usage of that particular expression. So we went back to the client, we went back to Tanya, and they said, no, we're not happy with that translation. So that went on for about 2 weeks, and we were pulling our hair out. So in the end, I grabbed Nikos and we went to Pronia to meet with the person that was giving us this feedback. And the interesting thing with personal face-to-face conversations is that the emotions drop straight away. Yes. Because first of all, people see that you're making an effort at trying to resolve it. And secondly, you've turned up with Nikos and we're going to sort it out there and then. So in any case, through this entire process, we discovered that about 25 years ago, the Greek community leaders in Victoria decided that end-of-life messaging will be difficult to digest for the Greek community. And what they've done is they've decided that instead of palliative care, they're going to translate this Greek word as respite care in Greek, yeah, and that's the term that everybody was using throughout Australia, actually. And if you think about, and it's just one word in, you know, a 10,000 word translation, and 99.9 of everything could be perfectly done by Nikos, but if that word is mistranslated, that translation is worth nothing, right? Yeah. What it also does, if you think about it, when you have, or back then, if you had a Greek person requiring palliative care, and a palliative care nurse turns up to your home, you think that she's going to be giving you respite care.
That's right.
So the community kind of hijacked the entire expression, the entire concept. So we went back to the client and said, look, this is the situation. But guess, Mary, what the client decided to do?
Let me guess. They followed you.
So they kept the mistranslation, agreeing to educate the community longer term, because they had real concerns about how that's going to be adopted or accepted by the community. So we liaised with them very closely on how to manage that. But in the end, they went with what Pronia recommended, because it was felt that that's what the community needed here in Australia. So if you pick up a translation like that, you know, linguistically, you pick it up and say, you know what, palliative care is mistranslated, but there's a reason for that, right?
That's right. Yeah. And so that's what we're talking about, right? It's about the cultural aspect of it, the political aspect of it. And that is why for the translators, it is so important to know and to take on board, even though it has nothing to do with the skills as translators. It's that sometimes it's way beyond us. And that's good because we deliver great things for the community as a consequence. But yeah, I can understand why it could be disheartening as a translator when it doesn't yeah, it's not actually linguistically correct, right? But so, and this is why also I think it's important that we're here to give this feedback and to explain to the translator what happened along the way. So you know, so they know about that.
Well, that's right, and also to the client, so they can understand the complexities of the translation process. And I guess sometimes we do have to make decisions around things that, you know, somebody has to finalize it, because we can go on forever, you know, talking about one word or one expression. So at the end of the day, the decision has to be made, and we are very transparent in our work. So we will tell the client that there's an issue. And in consultation with the client, we might make the decision that's best for the community, but it might not be the best linguistic choice. So we had to kind of manage that whole relationship between language and between Nikos and between Pronya and the client. You know, it was quite a complex thing to manage, but the thing was that we wanted to really get to the bottom of it. And I think that's one thing we do well, that where you know, when the feedback's received, we try and understand what it is that people are trying to tell us.
That is correct. And also when we go to translator and say, can you review this because the client is not sure, and it's great that to have a detailed feedback back from the translator, because just saying no, it's just stylistic, forget about it. Yeah. It's not going to help. When you have yesterday I had the example in Italian where a job title had not been translated. It had been translated in every other languages, many of them, but not in Italian. So the client was a bit surprised and asked me to add the translation. And after reaching out to a translator, she explained, well, this title actually does not exist in Italian. It doesn't mean anything. Culturally, it's irrelevant. So she said, if the client wants a translation, you can offer this, but I would not recommend this option. So when I got back to the customer, I explained that to the client, I explained that to her. She thought, oh, yeah, okay, that does make sense, and I follow you, and that's completely fine. So because this client did not speak the language, she couldn't know that. And having a detailed feedback explaining why we made such a decision in translating or not translating that case, then that makes the difference.
Because it is a matter of trust, isn't it? That whatever document you've prepared, or whatever the source text or brochure or website or whatever it is, that you're handing it over to people that are treating you with respect, that they're competent and able to do justice to what you've written.
That's right.
But it's not a sort of linear thing where, you know, there's no such thing as word for word. So there's a lot of fuzziness around language, around words. And people have opinion, they have, you know, they're subjective, they're emotional, there's all kinds of things around language. And at the end of the day, I think if you can, as you said, Marie, if you can show the process that the translator went through and the independent checker went through, or the community went through, and the rationale for which they're providing certain feedback, then the client can have that reassurance and that trust that, you know, we're working through a very robust and trustworthy process, and we're not just sending it somewhere overseas and hoping for the best when the translation comes back.
That is right. Absolutely. Yeah.
We've got a few minutes for questions, Marie, and I really did want to thank you for, and I know that, you know, I know you're super busy, for dedicating your morning. I think it's been very useful to me even, but you know, I can see that quite a few people are watching. So Andrea, do we have any questions?
We do have, Eva. So the first question will be related to translations involving communities. So is there any way that translations co-design with the communities be a solution for these inconsistencies in translation or mistakes?
Do you want to handle that one, Mary, or you want me to?
Up to you. It's really up to you. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and I'll sure.
Look, I think what we sometimes forget about is this, that if you brief your translation company, if you brief your translator well and help them prepare for the job, the outcome and the quality will be much, much better than when it's a rushed, you know, and I know that a lot of translations we've been doing recently are, you know, we need to be really, really fast. So there's a lot of pressure. But I think briefing and explaining, creating glossaries, liaising between the translator and checker is really, really crucial, because there will be, you know, I'll give you an example. There's a word, and every now and then I do a few translations. I just did Polish the other day, and the word lockdown. You know, there's a Polish equivalent, but they don't use it in Poland. They use it as lockdown, and it's a word that's familiar to us here. Yeah. So I, as a translator, have to make a decision. Okay, do I use the Polish equivalent, knowing that people won't necessarily know what it means, or do I go with the English version? And you know, a linguist will give me feedback to say, look, that's an Anglicism. What have you done? You know, like, this is wrong. So I think, you know, if there are issues like that, it's really important to workshop them, and potentially even say to the customer, to the client, look, I have used the English equivalent because I think, based on my experience, or my feedback, or my community consultations, that's the best word to use. So I think definitely preparation, briefing, and glossaries are really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I would have said the same thing about glossaries, and also the difference between a community. The community is embedded in the Australian culture, so this is where you can have differences like the one you mentioned with lockdown, and this is where it's important for us to step in and say it's more appropriate in this culture for this community to choose that option for that reason. So yeah, absolutely. Sorry,
right,
Andrea.
Thank you, thank you so much, guys. Yeah, perfect. The other question will be, are back translations a good tool to check the accuracy of your translations?
Don't get me started on back translation, Andrea, or whoever's asked this question. No, it's a really, really bad tool. There's only one, and I can see that Marie wants to jump in, but there's only really one space where that's a really appropriate and used tool, and that's scientific papers and surveys. But other than that, so for those people that don't know what back translation is getting your translation done and then translating it back to the language that it's come from. And the reason that it's a bad idea is that the closer to the original, so let's say you translate from, say, English to French and then French to English, the closer to the original, the worse the translation is. Yeah. And it won't pick up things like spelling errors. You know, it's not a good tool. Would you agree, Marie? Or am I?
Oh yeah, no. I fully agree with you. I'm struggling with the concept of it, and I'd rather have an in-language checker and community checker that is that is much more meaningful, and you get much more insight on what's going on, rather than doing back translation.
Yeah, the main thing is also that it doesn't improve the quality of the translation. So let me give you an example. If I to try and illustrate it. So if I you know, if I use the word say passionate, yeah, there's so many ways that you could translate it into Polish or Russian or whatever. So let's say I as a translator use excited or dynamic or something like that, and you as the client will look at that and say, well, that doesn't say passionate, that says excited. It doesn't mean that it wasn't the right word to use in French or Russian. Do you know what I mean? So it's a matter of, you know, you do have to use your judgment when you translate, and it's not always a word. It never should be a word for word thing. So you translate concepts, not words. For example, if I said to you, you know, red herring, are you going to translate it as, you know, a herring that's red? No, it just, you know, there's a concept behind it that means something that's not quite right, or something that leads you the wrong pathway or whatever, right? So languages have a lot of expressions like that, that to be able to translate them, you can't use the same words. So if we said red herring in a back translation, you'll get red herring, but it doesn't mean red herring in French, basically.
That's right.
Thank you, guys. We have one more minute. Should I use Google Translate to check my translations? Would that be useful? Would I get a more neutral translation in that way?
Sorry, Eva. So
Go.
that's an interesting one, right? Because sometimes our clients, they don't have the resources to check the languages, right? So and they just want to do some quality insurance somehow. So the only thing they've got is Google Translate, because they don't know any native speaker or they don't have any in-house checker. So that's what they're gonna use. Well, we know what's gonna happen from there. We know that it's not going to look good at all. And we know that we're going to, it's not even a feedback that we can give to translators, because we know at our stage already that it's not going to be right. So usually what we do is we still give it to the translators to check again, but in 99% of the cases we know that it's not going to provide any insightful feedback. So when with Eva we're talking earlier on about what's a good feedback, what's not a good feedback, well, yeah, saying to a translator, hey, translation is not good, I checked with Google Translate and it's different, that's definitely not an interesting feedback, because it doesn't give any context or any value or any it's not accurate enough to understand what's wrong. So yeah,
what to rely on. And in fact, those people that don't know how platforms like Google Translate work, they're basically statistical engines. They're not intelligent, they don't understand language, they just compare. So for example, you could get a really, really good translation of Chekhov's work because they've been done by a real person, you know, like over a period of years, and checked and rechecked and rewritten. So any of the classics they've put into that engine so that if you wanted to find that sentence, it'll pop up a perfectly crafted, beautiful translation. But it's not an intelligent, it's a machine. So, you know, the other day, I think somebody gave us some feedback in another context, not in work, but instead of caveat, Google translated it as caveman. So, you know, that's funny, haha, but you really can't rely on it on, you know, to provide feedback. Having said that, over the last, you know, 5 years, those engines such as Google or Microsoft Translate have improved enormously, particularly between some languages that are quite close to English, like, you know, for example, French or Spanish. Yeah. So nowadays you can get a pretty good gist of what you're translating. Just remember that whatever you put into Google, Google owns. So, you know, I wouldn't put, you know, anything where people's confidentiality would be breached, because that's in terms of and conditions of Google that, you know, they own everything you put. But those machine translation engines are being trained, and, you know, they are being improved. Would you agree, Marie?
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I would add that, so I'm a translator for years, and I know that every time I'm being told, hey, Google Translate can do your job, there's nothing that hurts you more than this. So we're talking about emotions, and it's really hard to take on. It's, you know, it really hurts. But the thing is, we don't have a choice. It's there, it exists, and people are going to use it whether we like it or not. So again, it's about us taking a big breath, and, you know, and explaining the difference you make as a human being doing the translations, and why your translation is correct versus the one that you get from Google Translate. And that's really all we can do, not taking personally, but knowing that it's there. And yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it fulfills the role. If you want to send a message to your friend in, you know, in Brazil, that's perfectly fine. That there's no risk. I guess, you know, there's a risk of misunderstanding, but, you know, it's not a crucial, it's not a key or essential piece of information that you're exchanging. So that's absolutely fine. Marie, you've been amazing. Thank you so much again for dedicating your time. What I was going to ask you, just give us 3 final tips of what to do when we're handing translation feedback.
3 tips?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So in a nutshell, don't take it personally, grow from it, and it's not exact, and we're all in this together, and we're making things better.
Amazing. Marie, thank you so
Thank
very
you,
much.
Eva. Thank you.
I think it's been great. We've got quite a few people watch, quite a few questions, and hopefully we've answered all of your questions. If we haven't, you know where we are in Melbourne, in lockdown. We can only go out for an hour a day. So reach out, ask questions, and yeah, keep in touch. And thank you so much, Marie. Thank you,
No,
Andrea,
thank you,
as
Eva.
always.
Thank you, Andrea. Have a great day, everyone.
You too. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.